Picture children being drugged and trafficked to private imperial villas, where Rome's most powerful men gathered for nights of unspeakable depravity, their screams muffled by marble walls while senators and generals took turns destroying young lives for entertainment. Imagine a system so sophisticated that it operated for centuries, protected by wealth, political power, and a code of silence that guaranteed anyone who spoke out would face torture and death. This is the hidden truth about the Roman Empire's most carefully guarded secret. The imperial pleasure parties, where children were consumed like wine and discarded like broken pottery. What happened behind the closed doors of imperial villas wasn't just abuse. It was the systematic destruction of innocence by the very men who claimed to embody civilization and moral authority. Before we expose one of history's most protected conspiracies, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because the truth about Rome's secret parties reveals how power creates its own morality, no matter how monstrous. Marcus Lucullus operated the most sophisticated child trafficking network in the Roman Empire, supplying beautiful boys to the secret gatherings that took place in private villas throughout the Italian countryside, where emperors, senators, and wealthy merchants gathered to indulge in pleasures that were forbidden even in sexually permissive Roman society. His operation was so well organized and so carefully protected by powerful patrons that it functioned essentially as a state-sponsored enterprise, providing entertainment for the men who controlled the civilized world. The procurement system that Lucullus had developed over decades of service to imperial clients was both vast and invisible, reaching into every corner of the empire to identify and acquire children who met the specific requirements of his distinguished customers. His agents operated in slave markets, orphanages, and impoverished communities throughout the Mediterranean, using a combination of purchase, kidnapping, and debt bondage to secure a steady supply of boys between the ages of 8 and 15. The selection criteria were precise and unforgiving, as Lucullus's clients demanded not just physical beauty, but specific combinations of innocence, intelligence, and psychological vulnerability that would maximize their entertainment value during the elaborate parties that had become central to Roman elite social life. Boys who showed signs of previous abuse were rejected as unsuitable, while those who retained their natural childhood spontaneity and trust were particularly prized for the contrast they provided when that innocence was systematically destroyed. The logistics of moving children from acquisition points to the private villas where they would be used required a network of safe houses, trusted transport agents, and corrupt officials who could ensure that inconvenient questions were never asked about the cargo being moved through Roman territories. Lucullus maintained permanent facilities in major cities where newly acquired boys could be housed, prepared, and trained for their eventual use at imperial gatherings. The financial arrangements that supported this operation were complex and carefully disguised, with payments flowing through legitimate businesses, religious institutions, and government contracts that provided cover for what was essentially a massive criminal enterprise. Wealthy clients paid enormous sums for exclusive access to the most desirable children, while also contributing to a fund that ensured the silence and cooperation of everyone involved in the network. Emperor Tiberius, who had retreated to the island of Capri for the final years of his reign, became one of Lucullus's most important and demanding customers, requiring a constant supply of new boys to satisfy appetites that had grown increasingly extreme and violent with age. The emperor's private villa had been specifically designed and constructed to facilitate the kind of activities that took place there, with soundproof chambers, hidden passages, and disposal systems that ensured no evidence of what occurred would ever reach the outside world. The code of silence that protected this network was enforced through a combination of mutual complicity, blackmail, and the understood threat of death for anyone who violated the trust of participants. Everyone involved, from the highest-ranking senators to the lowest servants, understood that speaking about what they had witnessed would result in their immediate elimination and the destruction of their families. The psychological impact on the children who survived these gatherings was rarely considered. As Roman law and culture viewed slaves as property rather than people with feelings or rights that deserve protection. The village Ovis on the island of Capri had been transformed into the perfect setting for the kind of entertainment that Emperor Tiberius craved in his final years, with specially constructed chambers designed to facilitate activities that would have shocked even Romans accustomed to their emperor's excesses. The isolated location ensured complete privacy, while the villa's architecture incorporated features that maximized both the participants' pleasure and the victims' suffering. Gaius, a 10-year-old boy from Gaul, found himself transported to this nightmare palace after being selected from a group of children that Lucullus had acquired during a trading expedition to the northern provinces. His blonde hair and blue eyes had made him particularly attractive to clients who preferred exotic appearances, while his obvious intelligence and sensitivity promised to provide the kind of psychological entertainment that had become central to these gatherings. The preparation process that preceded each gathering was elaborate and ritualistic, designed to maximize the impact of what would follow, while ensuring that participants felt they were engaging in something sophisticated rather than merely criminal. Boys were bathed in perfumed water, dressed in specially designed garments that emphasized their youth and vulnerability, and given drugs that would make them compliant while leaving them conscious enough to experience everything that was done to them. The gatherings themselves typically lasted for several days, with participants arriving and departing according to carefully planned schedules that ensured no participant could later claim ignorance of what others were doing. The entertainment was organized around themes and scenarios that allowed grown men to indulge fantasies that combined sexual gratification with psychological dominance over completely helpless victims. Senator Gaius Asinius Pollio, a respected literary figure and patron of the arts, was among the regular participants in these gatherings, demonstrating how easily intellectual sophistication and cultural refinement could coexist with the most depraved criminal behavior. His presence at these events, along with other supposedly respectable members of Roman society, revealed the complete moral bankruptcy that could exist behind facades of civic virtue and philosophical wisdom. The medical care provided during these gatherings was designed not to protect the children, but to ensure they remained functional for as long as possible despite the physical and psychological damage being inflicted on them. Skilled physicians were present to treat injuries, administer drugs, and revive children who lost consciousness, extending their suffering rather than ending it. The disposal methods employed when children were no longer useful or had been damaged beyond repair were efficient and left no trace that could later be used as evidence. Bodies were weighted and dropped into the Mediterranean, while surviving children who showed signs of psychological breakdown were sold to distant provinces where they could never return to testify about their experiences. The psychological conditioning that participants underwent helped them rationalize their behavior and maintain their public personas while engaging in activities that violated every principle of human decency. They convinced themselves that they were engaging in sophisticated entertainment that demonstrated their superiority over common people who could never understand such refined pleasures. The servants who witnessed these events were carefully selected for their absolute dependence on their employers and their understanding that speaking about what they had seen would result in their immediate death along with their families. The protection of the Imperial Pleasure Network required a sophisticated system of intimidation, blackmail, and elimination that ensured no participant ever spoke about what they had witnessed or participated in during the secret gatherings that had become central to Roman elite entertainment. Quintus Naevius Sutorius Macro, commander of the Praetorian Guard under Tiberius, served as the primary enforcer of this code of silence, using his access to imperial resources and legal authority to eliminate anyone who threatened the network's security. The surveillance system that monitored potential threats to the network's secrecy was vast and invisible, with agents placed throughout Roman society to identify and track anyone who might possess dangerous knowledge about the imperial parties. Servants, slaves, and even family members of participants were watched constantly to ensure they showed no signs of planning to reveal what they knew about the activities that took place behind the marble walls of private villas. Marcus Scribonius Libo Drusus, a senator who had participated in several gatherings, but began to show signs of guilt and psychological distress that made him a potential security risk, found himself the target of a carefully orchestrated campaign of intimidation designed to remind him of the consequences of betraying his fellow participants. His family members began to disappear one by one, their bodies never found, while he received anonymous messages that made clear his own fate if he continued to show signs of wanting to confess his involvement. The elimination methods employed by Macro's agents were designed to appear natural or accidental, avoiding the kind of obvious murders that might attract unwanted attention to the network and its activities. Poisoning was preferred for high-profile targets, while accidents and suicides were arranged for lower-ranking individuals whose deaths would generate less scrutiny from investigators. The blackmail system that ensured continued participation and silence was based on detailed records of every participant's activities during the gatherings, including written accounts, artistic depictions, and physical evidence that could be used to destroy reputations and lives if anyone attempted to withdraw from the network or expose its operations. These records were maintained in secure locations and updated after each gathering to ensure maximum leverage over all participants. The legal framework that protected the network was carefully constructed to ensure that any investigation into the activities would be stopped before it could uncover dangerous evidence. Corrupt magistrates, judges, and legal officials were either participants themselves or had been compromised through blackmail, creating a system where the law itself served to protect, rather than prosecute, the network's criminal activities. The few individuals who managed to escape from the network and attempted to expose its activities found themselves facing charges of treason, blasphemy, or other capital crimes that resulted in their execution before they could provide testimony about what they had witnessed. Their deaths served as powerful warnings to anyone else who might consider violating the code of silence. The financial resources available to maintain the system of protection were essentially unlimited, as participants contributed vast sums to ensure their security while also using their political influence to redirect imperial resources toward protecting the network's operations. The cost of maintaining silence was considered a reasonable investment compared to the consequences of exposure. The death of Emperor Tiberius in 37 AD marked the end of the most systematic and protected period of the Imperial Pleasure Network. But the infrastructure and participants that had been developed over decades of operation continued to function under subsequent emperors, who either participated directly or chose to ignore activities that implicated too many powerful people to prosecute safely. The network's ability to survive political transitions demonstrated how deeply embedded it had become in the structure of Roman elite society. Caligula's accession to power initially raised hopes among the network's opponents that the new emperor might investigate and prosecute the activities that had taken place under his predecessor, but the young emperor's own psychological instabilities and sexual appetites made him a participant rather than a prosecutor of the system he inherited. His brief reign saw an expansion rather than a contraction of the activities that had characterized Tiberius's final years. The transformation of participants as they aged revealed the lasting psychological damage that involvement in the network inflicted on everyone it touched, as men who had begun as occasional participants found themselves unable to experience normal sexual relationships or form genuine emotional connections with other human beings. Their need for increasingly extreme stimulation led to escalating violence and the development of new forms of abuse that pushed the boundaries of human cruelty. The few children who survived their experiences in the network carried physical and psychological scars that marked them for life, making it impossible for them to integrate into normal Roman society or form the kind of relationships that might have provided healing from their trauma. Most became involved in prostitution, crime, or other forms of self-destructive behavior that led to early deaths, while those who lived longer often became recruiters or facilitators for the same network that had destroyed their own lives. The historical record of these activities was systematically suppressed through the destruction of documents, the elimination of witnesses, and the creation of alternative narratives that portrayed the participants as respected members of Roman society, rather than criminals who had violated the most basic principles of human decency. The success of this cover-up meant that future generations would remember men like Tiberius and his associates as political leaders, rather than child abusers. The broader impact on Roman society was profound but largely invisible, as the network's activities contributed to the moral corruption that would eventually contribute to the empire's decline and fall. The normalization of extreme cruelty and the systematic exploitation of the powerless created a culture where violence and abuse became acceptable methods of entertainment and social bonding among the elite. Modern historical research has uncovered fragments of evidence that suggest the scope and systematic nature of these activities, but the successful destruction of most records means that the full extent of the network's operations and the number of its victims will never be known. The few surviving accounts hint at a level of organized child abuse that exceeded anything seen in recorded history. The legacy of Rome's secret pleasure network serves as a warning about how easily civilized societies can normalize the most horrific behavior when it serves the interests of powerful people and is protected by codes of silence that make exposure impossible. The price of that silence was paid by thousands of children whose suffering was hidden behind marble walls and forgotten by history. The next time someone glorifies the grandeur of ancient Rome, remember the children whose screams were silenced behind marble walls, while emperors and senators satisfied their darkest appetites. Their story reminds us that every civilization's greatest achievements can hide its most monstrous crimes, and that power without accountability inevitably leads to the exploitation of the innocent. If this disturbing expose of history's most protected conspiracy opened your eyes to how easily evil can hide behind respectability, smash that like button, subscribe for more suppressed truths about the dark side of power, and hit that notification bell, because the most important stories are often the ones that powerful people spent centuries trying to bury. What other historical institutions do you think hid similar systematic abuse behind facades of respectability? Share your thoughts in the comments below.